So as I mentioned, I have combined the sections of open talk and ghost surreal because what I'm going to talk about kind of includes both of those elements. And the subject I want to get into today is why haunted houses are always depicted as creepy and abandoned. Now, when I do the downtown Hamilton ghost walk, when I'm leading them, I do kind of touch on this. It's not technically part of the script. I just added it myself because I'm so fascinated by the subject of what causes a building or a house to be haunted. So it's in front of Hamilton Place Theatre in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, where I'm from. And I talk about Hamilton Place being not that old. So it was built in the 1970s, which would technically make it math, about 50 years old. And when you think of haunted houses, you think 100 or more. You think they've been lived in by families, that there have been events, tragic and happy, that have created energy inside the space that eventually lead to ghostly experiences. When you think of haunted houses, that's what you think of, right? So Hamilton Place being so young, you wouldn't think it would have the energy to gain that. Now, I'm not going into the idea of theaters here, so just to touch on it, ghostly energy is related to living energy. Theaters have a constant bursts of these living energy through the shows that are put on, the emotions that are felt by the crowd and the actors and actresses. Basically builds the place up like a candle to the other side. Go into more detail in the future, but that's the idea behind Hamilton Place being haunted. But when you talk about a house, the idea that it's just one family living inside the house at any given time, and sometimes it's not even a family, sometimes it's a couple, maybe a couple with a dog, and you're not getting a lot of energy inside of a space. Like anywhere I live, there's really not a lot of energy happening in there. I'm a very laid back person. I am also kind of a mysterious, I guess. I'm not the most social butterfly that you would ever meet in your life. So any house that I live in is going to be calm. That there's really not much going on there. So combine those over generations, and you can say that a house would have to be on this earth for at least 100 years to have this build up, unless you have a house that has a burst of that energy. So by burst, what I'm talking about is, and this is sad to mention, but tragic events. So if a house is the stage to a tragic event, that stigma kind of hangs over it forever. I don't know if it's related to the house itself. You could talk about energy being sucked into the wood of a structure, as wood is kind of a living thing, trees, plants, and whatnot. I don't think drywall would suck in energy, but definitely I think wood, and that house that has a lot of wood that could hold on to that type of energy. You could talk to me about drywall. You could talk to me about steel. I mean, it's all matter and it all exists in our reality. So it is energy, but maybe wood is even more. So older houses too, they use more real wood and not the pressed stuff you see in current houses today. So then you could also talk about, would historic houses be more haunted, say 100 years down the road? A historic house is 200 years old. A newer house is 100 years old. Would that newer house be as haunted as an older house would be? Again, it's off topic to what I'm talking about now, in a way. But the idea that I'm going to focus in on here is that the energy of tragic events and even happy events inside of a place leave that impression. So if a younger house has a really bad tragic event, the impression remains. If an older house has events over the years, then it just builds up over time. So each generation, it's just another piece. So then you have, ghosts from different generations that haunt a space. So there's your idea of energy. Energy building up in a house that creates it haunted. So why are haunted houses most creepy when they're old and abandoned. Well, abandoned kind of touches onto your subconscious, because when you see an abandoned house or building, if you're anything like me, it's going to freak you out. So the idea that it's abandoned for a reason. Now you might think, oh, maybe it's just a bad neighborhood. There's many different neighborhoods, say in the city of Detroit, for example, where there's abandoned houses everywhere, and you think, okay, so the neighborhood chased them away. But if you get an abandoned house in a location that's not explained by being a bad place to live or scary in that sense, then there's really no reason for that to be the case. There's a house in Niagara-on-the-Lake that's a good example of that. It was the Ghost Walks fan page I've recently posted. If anybody wants to go look, there's photos of it. Niagara-on-the-Lake is a beautiful place to live, and this house, very rarely you're going to have a house that's abandoned like this, especially for 50 or 60 years, which has been sitting there like that for that long. So then you ask the question, well, what's the reason? People have their theories. But what I think personally, the feeling of dread that comes along with a truly haunted place. So if a tragic event occurs in a location, and technically we are all connected, and the energy of the people in that tragedy, it kind of gets sucked into the bones of the house, you're going to feel it. So just to give you an idea of the feeling of dread, this can come along with a tragedy, it can come along with a restless spirit that is very negative in energy. And my own personal experience after an investigation I did back in the early 2000s, something followed me home. And that was my first experience with that feeling of dread, because at home you're supposed to be relaxed. And I wasn't, because this thing seemed to kind of hang out in the living room. And I couldn't be in the living room, especially at night. And God help you, I could never shut off the lights. That would just be the absolute worst. So something was telling me on the inside that it was something to fear inside my living room. And things also happened inside in the apartment. Things moving around. At one point, dirt was sprinkled over the carpet, as if somebody took a handful and just lightly sprinkled it throughout the living room and dining room. And this happened within seconds of me leaving and coming back. So stuff was happening, the feeling of dread inside the living room. And it took me a while, my first experience after all, to realize that, something had followed me home. Because then we started realizing this ghost at the location that we were investigating was something different. The location was very haunted. Things that you couldn't explain away as natural. So it had followed me home. So at that point, I talked to friends who are psychics and got the suggestion of confronting the thing and sending it away. So if this ever happens to you, just know, fear is its best weapon. So if you don't fear it and you're able to take charge, your living energy is more powerful. It can push it away. So that's what I did. Standing in the living room, lights off, nighttime, close my eyes, and that feeling, it felt as if something was standing right in front of my face. And then I that was motivation enough. I got rid of it. I told it to get out, minus all the swear words, and it was gone. The air lifted in the room, the dread lifted, everything was gone. That was my home. That's where I lived. This energy didn't have any claim to that home. It lived somewhere else in the place I was investigating. So I was able to clear it. You get a house that had a tragedy inside of it, in a way, that energy is already at home. So I don't think it's something easily cleared. I don't know, a psychic can chime in and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but from the standpoint of common sense, I don't think it's something that's easily cleared. Because if it is embedded in the actual wood and material of that house, then it's sticking around. So that gives us the idea of a house being abandoned and creepy. That's why it's haunted, because the energy from the tragic event has now become a part of the structure itself. You could ask the question, if I knock down the structure and build another house, will the energy still remain? I have examples to give you, such as the Oban Inn in Niagara-on-the-Lake, where yes, that is the case. But I also have examples to give, such as the old Oxford House of Refuge that stood in Woodstock, Ontario, that it is not the case, that the energy went with the structure. So I guess it really just depends on what happened and how it seeped into that place. Now, to get to the main story of this occurring in the city of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, this one was one that was embedded into the house. So if you look up in Hamilton, there's a street, Upper Wellington. So Hamilton is separated. There's a downtown area, and then there's what we call the mountain. It's not really a mountain. It's more of an escarpment or a hill, but we call it the mountains. Sounds cool. So there's Lower Wellington, which is Wellington, and there's Upper Wellington. So Upper Wellington Street, right when you come up from the access to the escarpment, as you're driving up, just past, oh goodness, it's either Queensdale or Brucedale, but either way, just past it, there's a police association hall, so like for events that are put on. And right beside the police association hall, there's a parking lot. Now, this parking lot used to be the location of a house. Now, the reason the house is not there anymore is what I am actually talking about today. So the house at one point had a family living in it, the Bilotti family. Not going to get into too much detail about the people themselves, but think of Amityville-esque. So in Amityville, it was George and Kathy Lutz and their family that had the experiences. In this case, it was the Bilottis. So they had rented the house and were now living in it. I believe it was the 1960s or 70s. I don't have the article in front of me right now. So they move into the house, and things already had started occurring. The usual stuff you hear in any haunted house, like doors slamming on their own and lights coming on. They heard footsteps on the second floor when they were on the first, knowing nobody was up there. And this escalated over the days and the weeks that passed, and then it got worse. And I think one of the factors that chased them out of the house was waking up in the middle of the night in the master bedroom. It was Mr. and Mrs. Bilotti, and looking up to see a disembodied face watching them sleep. If there's even a little bit of truth to that experience, I'd be out that door as well. So I don't know whether they waited till the next morning or just left in the middle of the night, but they left. They didn't come back for obvious reasons. So they had been only renting, which means there was an owner of the house. The owner never lived in the house. So at this point, the owner's like, okay, I might have some crackpots here. Sorry, I don't think they're crackpots, but that's maybe what he was thinking. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna try and rent it. Doesn't rent. Okay, I'm gonna try and sell it. Doesn't sell. This poor guy was probably very confused. Unless he was a believer in the paranormal, I think he was just extremely confused that nothing was working out for him. So in the end, he just gave up. And he sold it very cheaply. Now, I don't know if it was the police association of the city who took it over, but somebody bought it for a song with the sole reason of demolishing the house and making the parking lot. So then they start tearing down the house, and here you have these construction workers that, I'm sure are very serious men and women, and probably didn't really subscribe to the idea of a haunted house. I'm sure they heard the rumors. It was quite known around the city. But they started having experiences, and most of it was from the second floor. This is, of course, the location of the master bedroom where that really spooky occurrence happened. So they would hear footsteps, they would hear voices from up there, so much so that they delayed demolishing the house a couple times because they were afraid that somebody had snuck in. Of course, they would go up and look, and there was nobody there. So as they start tearing down the house and they tear down the walls of the upstairs rooms, I believe it was the master bedroom, but in one of the walls they found a tombstone. This is where it takes a bit of a turn. Now, I'll come back to that in a second, but I just want to talk about very quickly the reason why the house didn't sell. Now, when you walk into a house, anybody who's ever been looking for a place to live, rent or buy, when you walk into a place, you get a feeling for it. Even if you're not psychic, everybody gets a feeling for it. We all have that ability to feel the energy of a space, whether you admit it or not. So if a place feels like it's home, you're gonna buy it or you're gonna rent it. But if there's something not right about it, could be anything. Could be the neighborhood. It could be the way it's set up physically. It doesn't meet your needs. But beyond that, there's also a feeling. It has to feel like home. It has to feel comfortable. So any haunted house that has a slight feeling of dread to an extreme feeling of dread, you're going to walk into it. You're going to be like, there is no way on God's green earth that I'm going to live in this place. And you're going to just be like, okay, it's done. And you're going to tell your real estate agent or whatever that I don't want it, and you're going to leave. And with a truly haunted place that has a tragic event that leaves that feeling of dread that I talked a little bit about in my experience, you're gonna run for the hills. So for that reason, houses can never sell, they can never rent, and if there's no other purpose, such as in this case on Upper Wellington, to knock down the house for a parking lot, then it just ends up being abandoned. So there's the crux of it. There's where, it goes from being a lived-in, loved-after house to being creepy, abandoned, and alone. And then you have our stereotypical view of what a haunted house is and all those cartoons and graphics that you see, the abandoned house on the hill with the boarded-up windows and the cobwebs. There's my explanation of why it ends up being abandoned and why that is a feeling of creepiness mixed in, of course, with the dread you might feel even just looking at it from outside. So that's my reasoning, but just to tie up the one loose end, the tombstones, if you're interested in that. So on Upper Wellington, you have close to the escarpment, but if you go a kilometer up the street past Stone Church, there on the left-hand side is an old pioneer cemetery. They're all over the mountain. This one belonged to the Young family, and just before the house on Upper Wellington was built, a tombstone belonging to two Young family daughters, so two little girls who had died young, and had gone missing in the middle of the night. Nobody knew where the tombstone ended up, and it ends up inside this house on Upper Wellington. I don't know why. We never figured that part out, but they believe that was causing the original restlessness. That in this case, it wasn't really a tragic event, but in a way you could say it's a instance of voodoo, because you disrupt sacred ground like a cemetery, steal this memorial to these young girls, and move it into a place that's very foreign to them, that you can create a restlessness and a restless spirit or spirits. And then you have what occurred to the Bilotti family on Upper Wellington. So, talk a little bit for anybody who has a haunted house with a restless spirit. This is not something that you need to live with. And actually, I would highly recommend not living with it, because a restless spirit, in a way, can be a danger. I'm not talking about what you see in haunted horror movies of being murdered by a knife flying across the kitchen at your head. I'm not talking about that. I am talking about something that has been commonly stated, that you might be pushed on the stairs. That's probably the most dangerous it can get physically, but I am also talking emotionally. If you have a negative energy inside of a house, that it can affect you, it can affect your loved ones, and that you could be having arguments with your loved ones and not even realize why. So that is actually, in my mind, one of the even bigger dangers, because as long as you're using the handle, the banister on the stairs, that you're going to be safe. But when it comes to emotionally being affected, hitting you in your ego, hitting you in your angry moments or your off days, like I've been having these last couple days, that it just creates that unneeded stress in any loving relationship and with families and parents and kids. So for that, I would recommend attempting to clear the house. Now, how do you clear the house? A couple suggestions. First one, as I did, talk to it. Tell it you don't like the way it's acting. Tell it that this is your house now. Use your living energy to either push it away or change the situation so that the spirit just leaves you alone, and that it can be restless on its own time away from you. Then that's fine as well. So talk to it without fear, with as much calm as possible. Now, speaking of calm, keeping a calm and a high frequency of thinking and talking is a very powerful method as well. What I'm talking about is through meditation, getting to that point where even if there was an outside negative emotion that was trying to affect you, that your own negative emotions wouldn't add to it. And even a next step is that you would be so calm and positive that you would push it away as what it is. It's just an outside influence, not anything connected to you, that your body would know enough to do such a thing. So living calm, keeping a high frequency, which means staying positive in the way you think and the way you talk. Always see the good side of things and the good side of people. Avoid judgment and, try and feel love for everything, even the people who have wronged you, the enemies, so to speak, to try and feel love for them, to be able to release that negative energy. That's another way of combating, because your energy is so much more powerful that the energy of the restless whatever won't affect you. And worst case, in the end, get a psychic to help. Now, there are a lot of good psychics out there, but there are also some who are not so good, or maybe that they're knowingly trying to trick people into thinking that they are psychic. So just be careful who you get. You can get references from people who have used the psychic before, that you can see them, like if they've done any type of interview, or if they're talking on YouTube, look up videos of them and try and ask the question, okay, could they have possibly known what they were talking about? Like if they're doing a reading on video. For example, I saw this one psychic on CNN, and because I'm so jaded to it and I've had experience in this, I was watching her ask questions of the person she was reading, and the person would give answers, and then later in the reading she would use the answers as if it was coming to her through psychic ability. And it was so obvious to me, and I think it was Larry King who was the host at the time, and he didn't pick up on it. But you can look for stuff like that, so references and videos and whatnot. Get psychic help to come in. I might even be able to point you in the right direction if you send me a message, just to let me know.